What actually occurs when a faithful bishop is abruptly cut off by the leader he was once standing next to? The religious world has been stunned by the apparent rift between Bishops Henry Fernandez and Joel Tudman. Finally, the hush has been broken. However, Tudman's revelations on his abrupt dismissal have the potential to upend our preconceived notions about church allegiance, authority, and leadership. The reality behind this story is much more nuanced than anyone anticipated, so stay with me. Greetings from the channel again. We're delving into a story today that has the religious community aflutter with doubt, anxiety, and questions. Bishop Henry Fernandez's recent dismissal of Bishop Joel Tudman is not your typical ecclesiastical conflict. This is a pivotal moment that reveals the vulnerability of relationships at the highest levels of ministry leadership and the true consequences of testing loyalty and trust. People silently pondered for months. Answers were never provided, but rumors persisted. Many questioned why someone with Tudman's prominence and influence would be fired so quickly. Why would a well-respected leader like Bishop Henry Fernandez take such an extreme step? Bishop Tudman has finally made his voice heard, and what he has to say differs greatly from what we were told. We'll break down the chronology of events, examine the tensions that exist behind the scenes, and share information that you won't find anywhere else in this video. Furthermore, what you are about to hear has the potential to fundamentally alter your perspective of these two men of God, their ministries, and the power conflicts that take place outside of the pulpit. This isn't just another headline, so have a seat. This is a tale of ambition, treachery, and the price paid for eventually speaking up. And believe me, as we dig deeper into the facts, you won't want to miss the surprises we find. Before delving into the dramatic termination itself, it's critical to comprehend Bishop Joel Tudman's background and the significance of his voice in the leadership and religious communities. The trip Joel Tudman has taken has been nothing short of extraordinary. He wasn't given influence or born into a mega ministry. His tale is one of perseverance, self-control, and a resolute search for God's calling. From the beginning of his ministry, Tudman was notable for his ability to relate to common people on a deep level in addition to his impactful sermons. His teachings went beyond ecclesiastical doctrine. They were about perseverance, survival, and using faith to get through difficult times in real life. People listened because of that. It was the reason he was trusted. Tudman's platform expanded over time. He gained notoriety as a voice for the underrepresented. A preacher who didn't hesitate to openly discuss both successes and setbacks. His leadership abilities made him a valuable member of whatever ministry he was involved with, and his genuineness attracted large crowds. Bishop Henry Fernandez, a man equally renowned in church leadership circles, eventually crossed his way. This collaboration seemed like fate to many. Fernandez had a ministry network that stretched across countries, a long-standing reputation, and power. Tudman contributed vitality, new insight, and a relationship with the next generation of Christians. They appeared to be invincible together. However, this is where the narrative starts to go darker. Tensions were building behind the stage smiles, the crowded sanctuaries, and the well-rehearsed sermons. Tensions that were invisible to most individuals. Even as the public praised this potent partnership, private divisions were already beginning to appear. We'll look at Bishop Henry Fernandez's ascent in the upcoming chapter and how his management style might have conflicted with Tudman's goals, finally leading to an unexpected and startling dismissal. We must examine Bishop Henry Fernandez, the man at the center of this judgment, in greater detail if we are to fully comprehend the significance of this debate. Fernandez has been a prominent role in the ministry for many years. He is well known for being the senior pastor of the Faith Center in Florida, which he founded and transformed into one of the most significant ministries in the area. The Faith Center evolved into more than just a house of worship under his direction. For thousands of believers, it developed into a place of empowerment, a cultural icon, and a center of spirituality. He is regarded as a recognized leader, not just in the U.S. but also abroad, since his voice has reverberated throughout conferences, TV shows, and international venues. Fernandez's leadership style has frequently been characterized as unyielding, visionary, and firm. He has always been an orderly individual who places a high importance on loyalty and organization. This has been seen by many as the secret to his success. He has the skills necessary to establish, plan, and maintain a ministry at the pinnacle of performance. However, it has also been criticized, much like any forceful leadership style. Some have argued that his emphasis on defending the institution may provide little opportunity for different viewpoints inside his group, and that his demand for allegiance can occasionally feel more like tyranny. Many considered Fernandez's mentoring of Bishop Joel Tudman as the ideal collaboration. Two strong leaders who could inspire one another to achieve more. Tudman was youthful, full of life, and had a strong bond with the younger generation. Fernandez was well-known, experienced, and had decades of clout. When combined, they appeared to be the ideal fusion of innovation and tradition. However, power dynamics are rarely that straightforward in ministry as they are in life. It's possible that Tudman's rising fame, his unvarnished preaching, and his capacity to captivate audiences with genuineness have started to eclipse Fernandez's more conventional style of leadership. Even when that kind of growing influence isn't intended to be a threat, some leaders may perceive it as such. Fernandez was still in charge, though. His choices influenced the faith center's course. Just his reputation had the power to open or close doors. It is for this reason that Fernandez's ultimate decision to fire Bishop Tudman was so unexpected. It was more than a small argument. This was a declaration, a message to the church, to Tudman, and to all others in attendance. The bit that keeps people talking, though, is this. Why would Fernandez have to let go of someone as significant as Tudman? What precisely transpired behind those closed doors? Was there more going on here than just a conflict of visions? Ambition, politics, or even betrayal on a personal level? We'll start assembling the sequence of events that resulted in Tudman's dismissal in the upcoming chapter. I promise you that the details will cause more questions than they will answers. Every significant fallout has a history. Furthermore, Bishops Joel Tudman and Henry Fernandez's paths to termination weren't quite clear. It began as small, slow changes that finally developed into irrefutable cracks. Let's go back. Tudman's presence at the spiritual center was electrifying at first. His enthusiasm, unvarnished honesty, and capacity to transcend generational divides drew many to him. Older members appreciated his strong devotion to the Bible, while younger believers felt seen and understood. In many respects, Tudman invigorated Fernandez's ministry by adding new vision to his already experienced leadership. However, as the weeks stretched into months, rumors started to circulate. Power disputes were discussed in whispers by some members of the congregation. Others saw that Tudman's sermons were viewed differently than Fernandez's. Was his mentor being overshadowed by the younger bishop? Was sharing the limelight weighing on Fernandez? The tension was evident, but no one could be certain. It is thought that a number of disagreements started to surface behind closed doors. According to reports, Tudman had suggestions for growing outreach initiatives that would help the church engage more closely with marginalized areas. However, Fernandez favored tactics that preserved the religion center's organized reputation and status, which had been meticulously cultivated over many years. These disputes weren't minor ones. These conflicts were philosophical, visionary, and ultimately ego-related. When Tudman was discreetly removed from several important initiatives, it was the first obvious break. He was no longer given the same amount of stage presence at important occasions, according to insiders. In contrast, his once celebrated voice became to sound subdued. It might have appeared to outside observers as a normal change of emphasis. However, it was an obvious signal to those who were listening. There was a shift. The writing was on the wall by the time reports of tense communication surfaced. Rumors are circulating in ministry circles that Tudman felt caught off guard, unsure of his position and whether his efforts were still appreciated. Conversely, Fernandez allegedly became more resolute, separating himself and solidifying his authority over all choices made inside the church's leadership. Then, the unexpected moment arrived. Bishop Joel Tudman lost his job abruptly and without giving a public reason. The congregation and beyond were rocked by the announcement. Instantly, questions began to arise. Why now? Why in this manner? And with what lack of clarity? The termination itself, however, may not be the most eerie aspect of this scenario. It's the quiet that ensued. Months passed. Furthermore, neither Tudman nor Fernandez made a comprehensive public comment despite the rumors that circulated. Only rumors were stoked by that silence. Churchgoers were split, supporters were irritated, and the larger religious community was in dire need of clarification. And Bishop Tudman finally spoke up precisely when everyone thought the truth might never be revealed. Being fired wasn't the only thing he disclosed regarding his leaving. It focused on his behind-the-scenes experiences and the unsaid pressures that arise when ministry leadership becomes mixed up in politics and power. We'll examine exactly what Tudman said when he initially spoke out in the upcoming chapter, as well as why his remarks might permanently change how people remember the story. No one could do anything but conjecture for months. Leaders spoke quietly behind closed doors, the faithful muttered in pews, and social media threads were rife with theories about what actually happened. Bishop Joel Tudman, however, stayed silent throughout it all, refusing to add gasoline to the fire with a rash declaration. Finally, he said something. Tudman didn't break his silence out of rage or recklessness. Charges. Rather, he adopted a composed tone that conveyed the sadness of disappointment, as well as the dignity of someone who continues to follow his vocation. But there's no denying that his statements disclosed enough information to leave people speechless. He started by discussing the specifics of his dismissal. Tudman described the event as sudden, unanticipated, and devoid of the respect and communication that one might anticipate between two seasoned leaders who had served on the same platform for years. The lack of communication was more painful than the termination itself for a guy who had dedicated his time, effort, and vision to the Faith Center. Tudman continued by implying the mood behind the scenes. He described a setting where choices were made all at once, and he felt as though his presence and voice were undervalued. He described a situation where devotion was expected but rarely returned, without specifically naming any individuals. His remarks struck a chord with everyone who has worked under effective leadership. What happens if your loyalty is received with dismissal and silence rather than cooperation? He also disclosed something that not many had thought of: the emotional toll it took on his loved ones and ardent fans in addition to him. After all, ministry involves more than just the leader on stage. The people behind them are the focus. When things go apart, they are the ones that bear the weight of transformation. Tudman's statement brought to light the repercussions of church politics and served as a reminder that every storyline hides a family dealing with personal suffering. However, this is the line that made many pause. Sometimes what appears to be rejection is actually God's rerouting, Tudman observed. He reframed the story with that one sentence. He was no longer just the expelled bishop. He developed into a man who refused to be defined by his termination. He hadn't been weak by being silent. It had been planning. When he eventually spoke, he discussed how God was preparing him for something bigger rather than just what had happened to him. That viewpoint sparked a flood of reaction. He was embraced by supporters who saw his remarks as a subliminal criticism of Fernandez's leadership as well as a proclamation of independence. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Was this really just about redirection? Or was Tudman carefully choosing his words to avoid a deeper conflict exploding into the public eye? Was the question that others pondered. Tudman broke his quiet, but he didn't limit his discussion to the past. He made a reference to his future, a future that has the potential to not only modify his own ministry, but also alter the way that people perceive loyalty, leadership, and legacy in the contemporary church. However, we must first remove one more layer before discussing what is ahead for him. Because even while Tudman's remarks shed light, they also prompted more inquiries. What prevented Bishop Fernandez from speaking out against Tudman's disclosures? Was it strategy, dignity, or something else? There are always two sides to any dispute. And even when Bishop Joel Tudman finally shared his story, there was still a lot of uncertainty. Bishop Henry Fernandez was where? Fernandez's silence grew nearly as loud as Tudman's final statements as soon as the news of his firing spread. Silence is a significant tool in leadership. It can convey strength in the face of criticism, shield reputations, or stop further escalation. However, in this instance, it just made the puzzle more complex. Recall that Fernandez is a well-known figure in the religious community. Because of his decades-long influence, international connections, and reputation as a man of order, people expected him to speak up, provide clarification, or at the absolute least, provide words of closure to a stunned crowd. Instead, there was nothing, no declaration, no thorough justification, just a blank space where the answers ought to have been. Why? According to some insiders, Fernandez's quiet is calculated. He presents himself as the calm leader who will avoid getting involved in controversies by declining to participate in public back and forth. According to this view, remaining silent is a sign of control rather than weakness. Some, on the other hand, regard it as a way of declaring, "I don't owe anyone an explanation." They contend that rumors spread when there is no truth, and that stillness invites conjecture. Instead of hearing directly from the man at the heart of it all, church members have been left to piece together bits and pieces of information, frequently depending on online forums and secondhand reports. Refusing to speak directly to his flock has caused dissatisfaction and raised eyebrows for a spiritual leader whose words have guided multitudes. However, we must not rule out the idea that quiet can serve as protection. Church politics are complex. There are frequently organizational, legal, and financial repercussions when high-level leaders disagree. Is Fernandez's quiet more about protecting the ministry from additional scrutiny than it is about showing indifference? Could he be holding back because expressing too much could have more serious repercussions than anyone thinks, rather than because he doesn't care? There is still one indisputable fact, though. There is a void left by Fernandez's voice being gone, and Tudman's story has essentially filled that void in the narrative. Tension increases in a court of public opinion when one side speaks and the other remains mute, thereby altering the balance of perception. Fernandez's fans view his quiet as wisdom, a rejection of criticism. Critics perceive it as avoidance, a refusal to face the truth of what transpired. In any case, the discussion has continued despite his quiet. In fact, it has fueled the flames of dispute over what the true truth might be, if anything. However, this is where the situation becomes even more fascinating. Silence is not permanent. History indicates that Fernandez will eventually have to deal with the issue, either directly or indirectly. He cannot stay silent indefinitely, whether it is by his conduct, a sermon, or a well-crafted comment. Furthermore, this story may take a completely different turn when he does talk. However, another question has already surfaced while we wait for that moment. What is the current role of Bishop Joel Tudman? From here, whither does he go? And how does he restore his identity in the eyes of the religious community in addition to his ministry? Because this debate may eventually be about his metamorphosis, even though it has been about his termination. It is common for one door to open when another closes. Furthermore, Bishop Joel Tudman's tenure may have continued after his dismissal. It could have been the catalyst for a completely different start. Tudman broke his silence to make it apparent that he is not defined by rejection. He presented the experience as redirection instead. And if history teaches us anything about leaders who experience failure, it is that many of them turn such setbacks into opportunities for growth. Rumor has it that Tudman is already getting ready for a new leadership phase that might take him outside the confines of the Faith Center. Tudman has all the ingredients needed to start a ministry that can stand alone thanks to his charisma, his ability to connect with people of all ages, and the devoted following he has amassed over the years. However, how would that appear? Some people think TDM would start his own church so he can set roots in a city and inspire a new group of people. Others believe he might rely more on online ministry, conferences, and digital platforms to reach audiences around the world who are hungry for his genuineness and enthusiasm. And as virtual ministry frequently reaches a wider audience than actual facilities in the modern world, this might be the ideal chance for him to create something bigger than anyone could have imagined. There will be difficulties, of course. It's never simple to rebuild after being publicly fired. Critics might attempt to portray him as the ousted bishop. Others might wonder if he has the finances, stability, or assistance to stand on his own. However, Tudman's tenacity has always been his strongest suit. Furthermore, if he is telling the truth, this season is not about establishing his value to others. It has to do with carrying out the task he feels God has given him. Meanwhile, the religious community keeps a tight eye on everything. Will this debate be forgotten as another ecclesiastical conflict? Or will it be the turning point that launches Bishop Joel Tudman into the most significant stage of his ministry to come? Bishop Henry Fernandez and Bishop Joel Tudman's story is about more than just dismissal. It's about allegiance, authority, leadership, and the hidden battles that go on behind the pulpit. We are reminded that human dynamics of ambition and conflict still play a part in sacred areas by Tudman's ascent, his abrupt dismissal, and his eventual determination to speak up. Fernandez continues to use quiet as his weapon of choice, forcing others to speculate about his true motivations and goals. Breaking the quiet was Tudman's way of taking back his fate, his voice, and his dignity. This narrative also serves as a somber reminder for the rest of us. Being a leader is more than just having a title. It's about how you behave toward others, how you resolve disputes, and how you react when the focus is diverted from you. What do you think then? Did TDM's termination have to do with direction and vision, or was there another factor at play? Is Fernandez's quiet an act of avoidance or wisdom in your opinion? Above all, what do you think Bishop Joel Tudman's future holds? Let's discuss it in the comments section below. I'd want to hear your viewpoint. For more in-depth coverage of hot and contentious subjects in the religious world, please like, share, and subscribe if this video opened your eyes. The tales behind the headlines are far from over, I assure you.